The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agree to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon video. In this video, I want to discuss an incredibly sad and disturbing scene that may or may not happen in House of the Dragon Season 1 finale on this Sunday. This is a scene that we might see shortly after Rhaenyra finds out her father Viserys has died. The reveal of Viserys' death will send a shockwave throughout Dragonstone that will have a shocking effect on Rhaenyra. As you all know, after Rhaenyra and Daemon got married, they also had sons named Aegon and Viserys, who we've already met in episode 8 of House of the Dragon. In that same episode where we met Rhaenyra and Daemon's sons, everyone should have noticed she had another one on the way. Throughout most of that episode, Rhaenyra had been holding her belly. Well, if House of the Dragon will be following George R.R. Martin's novel Fire and Blood, then we should see Rhaenyra go into labor in this final episode of the season. And let me just say, viewer discretion should be advised before this scene is aired. Now let me read what George R.R. Martin has written in Fire and Blood. This is how everything unfolds immediately after Aegon's coronation in King's Landing. Now, after the coronation, the remaining Kingsguard escorted Aegon to his mount, a splendid dragon with gleaming golden scales. Sunfire was the name given this dragon of the Golden Dawn. Grand Maester Munkin says how the King Aegon flew thrice around the city before landing inside the walls of the Red Keep. Sir Eric Cargill led his grace into the throne room, where Aegon, the second of his name, mounted the steps of the Iron Throne before 1,000 lords and knights. That's when shouts rang through the halls. Now, on Dragonstone, no cheers were heard. Instead, there were screams echoing through the halls and stairwells of the Sea Dragon Tower, down from the apartments where Rhaenyra Targaryen strained and shuddered in her third day of labor. Her baby had not been due for another turn of the moon, but the news of her father's death from King's Landing had driven Rhaenyra into a black fury, and her anger seemed to bring on the birth, as if the babe inside of her were angry as well and fighting to get out. Rhaenyra shrieked curses all through her labor, calling down the wrath of the gods upon her half-brothers and their mother, Alicent Hightower, and detailing the torments she would inflict on them before she would let them die. She cursed the baby inside of her too, Mushroom says, while clawing at her swollen belly as Maester Gerardus and her midwife tried to restrain her and shouting, "Monster, monster, get out, get out, get out!" When the babe at last came forth, she was indeed a monster. A stillborn girl, malformed, with a hole in her chest where her heart should have been, and a stubby, scaled tail. Or so Mushroom describes her. The dwarf says that it was he who carried the little thing to the yard for burning. The dead girl had been named Visenya, Rhaenyra announced the next day, when the milk of the poppy had blunted the edge of her suffering. Rhaenyra said, "She was my only daughter, and they killed her. They stole my crown, and murdered my daughter, and they shall answer for it." And so the Dance of the Dragons began, as Rhaenyra called a council of her own, known as the Black Council, setting it against the Green Council of King's Landing. Rhaenyra herself was there, seated in the middle of her husband Daemon Targaryen, and her trusted counselor Maester Gerardus. Her 3 sons were there with them, though none had reached the age of manhood. Jace was 14, Luke 13, and Joffrey only but 11. A few members of the Kingsguard stood with them, Sir Eric Cargill and the Westermen Sir Laurent Marbrand. 30 knights, 100 crossbowmen, and 300 men-at-arms made up the rest of Dragonstone's garrison. This army leaves something to be desired, Daemon observed sourly. A dozen lesser lords, bannermen, and vassals to Dragonstone sat at the Black Council as well, but the greatest lord to swear fealty to Rhaenyra was Corlys Velaryon of Driftmark. Although the sea snake had grown old, he liked to say that he was barely holding on to life, like a sailor holding on to the wreckage of a sunken ship. However, he also said, "Mayhaps the 7 have saved me for this one last fight." And with Lord Corlys Velaryon came his wife, Rhaenys Targaryen, who was 55, her face lean and lined, yet she was fierce and fearless as she had been when she was much younger. Those who sat at the Black Council counted themselves loyal, but knew full well that King Aegon would name them as traitors. Each of them had already received a summons from King's Landing, demanding they show themselves at the Red Keep to swear an oath of loyalty to the new king. All their forces combined could not match the power the Hightowers could alone field. Aegon's Greens enjoyed other advantages as well. Old Town, King's Landing, and Lannisport were the largest and richest cities in the realm. All three were held by the Greens. Every visible symbol of legitimacy belonged to Aegon. He sat on the Iron Throne. He lived in the Red Keep. He wore the Conqueror's crown and wielded the Conqueror's sword, and had been anointed by a Septon of the Faith before the eyes of thousands. Grand Maester Orwyle sat in his councils, and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard had set the crown on his head. And he was a male, which in the eyes of many made him the rightful king, his half-sister Rhaenyra the usurper. Now, against all that, Rhaenyra's advantages were few. Some older lords might yet recall the oath they had sworn when she was made her father's heir. There had been a time when she had been well loved by highborn and commons alike, when they cheered her as the realm's delight. Many a young lord and noble knight had sought her favor then, though how many would still fight for her, now that she was a woman wed, her body aged and thickened by 6 childbirths, was a question none could answer. Though her half-brother had looted their father's treasury, Rhaenyra had at her disposal the wealth of House Velaryon, and the Sea Snake's fleet gave her superiority at sea. And her consort, Daemon Targaryen, was battle-tested in the Stepstones, had more experience of warfare than all of her foes combined. And last, but far from least, Rhaenyra Targaryen had her dragons.
When ravens carried the news of Aegon's coronation to Dragonstone, Princess Rhaenyra summoned her own Black Council. With her was her uncle and husband, Daemon Targaryen, considered by many to be the most dangerous man in Westeros. Few lords supported her, but the greatest of these was Corlys Velaryon, who controlled the largest fleet in the realm, and his Targaryen wife, Rhaenys, the old king's sister. Then there were her 5 sons, although none grown to manhood. A pitiful assembly, really. Combined, they couldn't match the power of House Hightower alone. But Rhaenyra had dragons. She, Daemon, and Rhaenys rode huge and formidable beasts, and 3 of her 5 sons were riders as well. Dragonstone also housed 6 more dragons without riders.